Hey, and welcome to the Weed Out, where we weed out the nonsense and talk about the bullshit happening in our backyard. I'm Spencer Fox Peterson, along with my partner as always.
Hi everyone. I'm Joanna May Booty.
And we're back with our public records specialist, our favorite journalist, Andrew. We had him on previously to talk about a police brutality scandal happening in the Berkshires and involving multiple departments a few episodes back. We will list that in the show notes. So please, as always, just a friendly reminder, housekeeping to everybody listening. We are at www.theweedout.com, all one word, and you can find all of our resources, any sort of source materials, links to our Substack, links to our social media, and links to our podcast to share with your friends. Please share, like, and subscribe. We're on Patreon. We're on all your favorite social media platforms. We appreciate everybody tuning in, and this is some important stuff talking about shenanigans in Western Mass and Massachusetts and beyond. For example, all this stuff with police brutality that we talked about, Andrew, the reason he was able to uncover this story was through records requests, through documents, from asking around using the tools and laws available to us as citizens. And we'll get more into that as the episode goes along. Just wanted to remind everybody that these tools are available to all of us. It's our government, it's our records, and they owe them that they owe us them. And it's not very straightforward, especially in a place like Massachusetts, who touts itself as being progressive. It's a very hard state to get any records. And maybe you've heard of records requests before, or on the federal level, it's the FOIA, so Freedom of Information Act. That's correct, right, Joanna?
We'd have to ask
hmm
Andrew.
Yeah.
Andrew, yes.
Oh, Andrew, before we go any deeper, how are you today? And thank you for coming back on.
Uh, I'm good. Yeah. So for people who are interested in my work, it's andrewqmr.substack.com, and that's where the story we talked about last time is published. I publish a lot of stuff about public records, about police, about the legal system, um, and the relationship between all of those things. Um, and yeah, just to pick up on what you were saying earlier, public records, it sounds boring, like looking through documents, but like public records are actually really interesting and important. And yeah, like you said, the story we talked about last time, which I found out that, these two police officers were involved in this incident where they were accused of knocking a woman out. And I found out there's video of it, which I published. And I also found out that one of those officers had previously resigned from a different job over another incident where he had kicked someone in the groin. And there was a video of that too. And all of this stuff would just be, no one would have ever heard of it if it wasn't for the public records law. Like, this is something that is important because it allows people to see what's really going on in the government. Like, when you talk to the government as a journalist, typically they will put you through to they have different names, like a communications specialist or a public information officer, basically someone who is only going to tell you what the agency wants you to hear. And the way you find out things that they might not want you to hear is through public records requests and through getting the documents yourself, so that you have sort of the actual proof of what happened in a particular situation, instead of just relying on what you're told. And it's called public records because you don't have to be a journalist or a lawyer or anyone special. You can just be anyone, and you can request public records. In fact, in Massachusetts, you don't even have to live in Massachusetts. You could like live in Russia or China or something and request public records. Anyone can do it. So
And
um,
the reason, just to interrupt you, the reason that's important is because this is the people we're supposedly a democratic republic, and this is our, the people own this. So don't ever feel, I just want to jump in, and they will, in my experience anyways, they have made us feel that we're burdening them. And no, these are our records. And I personally, in my experience, they complain about systemic failures, such as everything's in paper, or it's in a file cabinet somewhere far away, or some excuse when we should have all this at our fingertips, in my opinion. Regardless, don't feel bad about asking for public records. You are entitled to them. They are yours. They are all of ours. So
yeah, and just to pick up on that point, that's something that comes up a lot. I mean, if you request public records, you will find like resistance to releasing public records. It might be that they just ignore your records request altogether, and you have to keep sort of following up and pressuring them, or they just won't respond. They just won't even acknowledge it. Sometimes, they try other things, like they'll try to charge really excessive fees. There's all kinds of things that we can get into, but it really does stem, I think, from this idea that public records are kind of like this annoyance, when in reality it's a core principle of living in like an open democratic society, that people have access to information about what the government's doing, like that things aren't happening in secret. Um, and when the public records law was updated in 2016, like this really extensive overhaul of the law that made a lot of changes and improvements. And there's a group called the Massachusetts Municipal Association, which is sort of like, it's sort of like, how like trade groups, like some like manufacturers will have like a lobbyist who goes before Congress and lobbies for their interests. It's sort of like that, except for
Oh,
city and town governments in Massachusetts. And it's not exclusively a lobbying group. It has other functions, but lobbying is one of their functions. And they were sort of, their perspective on like changes to the public records law was like, well, we have to be really careful because this is going to be a burden on cities and towns. And if we're not allowed to charge fees, then, it's going to cost us all this money. It's going to be an unfunded mandate and all this stuff. Like it was, there's just, I think, a perception that, like, why do we have to do this? Like, it's not like, they don't see it as a core function of their job, when in reality it is.
trust us.
um
Trust us.
yeah, and I mean, the amount of resistance you get depends on who you're requesting the records from and what records you're requesting. But the more you request records, the more likely you are to see this happening. It's very common.
I was gonna ask you that, Andrew, like just so the audience knows, like it's not just police departments, but you could request like things from like your health department, or
You.
yeah, or if you had any department or the mayor's office, like I guess, or like aren't, I think in my experience, but I'm gonna ask you like if you wanted to look at email exchanges or whatever. So I think not just the police. Sometimes I know, as like in myself, I've had to request records for personal things from like my town health department and building inspector when I was doing stuff, and I didn't get a ton of resistance until it was a lot of requests, like you said. But I'm in a very small town, and it's like they try to be somewhat good about that.
um well, yeah, I mean, it's not like just police. I mean, although police are particularly secretive, that's certainly true, but it's not just police. Like, police are kind of and prosecutors are the main agencies that I request records from, so that's what I have the most experience with. But you certainly hear uh, about people facing resistance from like schools, from like the health department. Like you said, I think during COVID, I believe the Boston Globe had reported that they were having resistance, from the Department of Public Health getting information about COVID.
Yeah.
Um, and like, it's just all over the government. Like, there's going to be resistance. Like, I think it's not even so much always, I think that, I mean, sometimes it is like deliberate, like that they don't want certain information to get out, but I think a lot of it just has to do with this culture of like, they see it as a waste of time and an imposition that they have to do this. And so they're going to devote as few resources as they can get away with, essentially. And I think that isn't necessarily true of every agency, but it's still like fairly common.
And just the absurdity of some of the excuses Joanna and I have got. Other towns in Massachusetts, police departments have disclosed their weapons inventory. Holyoke Police Department just basically did the Bugs Bunny meme to us, like, no. And the Secretary of State ruled in our favor, and they still said no. And they basically said, like, we could give that information to, I'm presuming, like another paramilitary. Like, that's the way they were acting, like it was like state secrets. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, that's when we need your help with eventually, Andrew.
You can see, like, you can also glean information over what they don't want you to see. I'm saying, like, you can start, like, sometimes when there is no information, that's like an indicator there's something maybe there that should be there.
Yeah, well, just for context for people who aren't familiar with the law is not like literally everything is public. Like there are what they're called exemptions, and I'm drawing a blank on how many there are. There's like a couple dozen, I think, and they're for different things. Like there's one for like law enforcement investigations, there's one for like personal privacy, there's other ones, and also in addition to those exemptions, there are certain laws that restrict certain types of information. So like there are legitimate reasons to withhold records, but these reasons are often just they're really like misused. They're applied much more broadly than they're intended. And often what you'll see, so when you get a response to a public records request where they're denying you records, what the law says, what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to list out the records that they're not giving to you. They're supposed to cite these specific exemptions, and then they're supposed to explain how that exemption applies to the records. But often they'll just do this blanket thing where they will cite an exemption and they might like copy paste the language from the law about what the exemption says, but there's nothing about why the exemption actually applies to the records. And you had alluded to you've made appeals. So there's the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office, which is run by Bill Galvin currently, William Galvin. There's a public records division, which is headed by someone called the Supervisor of Public Records. It's currently a woman named Manza Arthur, who was appointed, I think, last summer. But her office, they will hear these appeals from people who are denied access to public records or who can't get a response. And there's a lot of positive things about it, but also there's more negative things about it. Like the great thing about it is it's very simple. Like you just basically forward them the emails that you've gotten. You write up a short little thing, usually short, that just says like they've cited these exemptions and they haven't explained why they apply, or they've done X, and they will review it and they'll write a decision. And at least the current supervisor and the last supervisor before her, who was named Rebecca Murray, they, in my experience, side with people who send appeals in very often. But the problem is that the supervisor doesn't actually have a lot of power. So this is like an administrative process. It's just like a bureaucracy basically, where they get, all these, they get like 2,000 or 3,000 of these appeals every year, and they have these lawyers who have to, I don't actually know the exact number of lawyers they have, but I don't think it's like enough. Like they have to review these things in two weeks. They have 10 business days, and they are really basically, for the most part, they're kind of just like copying and pasting stuff. Like they're like, oh, this exemption says this, and you haven't shown that this exemption applies, so you have to write a new response. And that's kind of how these appeals go, because the supervisor can't enforce her decisions in court. So like if an agency says we don't agree with you, then the supervisor can't say, okay, well then I'm going to sue you, and the judge is going to tell you that you have to listen to me. She can't do that. What she has to do is refer it to the Attorney General's office. And this creates a huge problem because the Attorney General is one, the Attorney General's office historically has been sort of very slow. Like it can take months or like even like a year or more to sort of review one of these things and take action on it. And then the Attorney General may disagree with the supervisor of records. They may say, oh, I actually agree with the agency and I'm not going to do anything. Um, Often the Attorney General, when they get these things, will resolve it informally. Like they might talk to the agency and then the agency will realize like, oh, if the Attorney General is involved, I better do what they say because I don't want it to go to litigation. I don't want to be sued and waste the resources in court. But only like a few of those go to the Attorney General every year. Um, so out of like thousands of these appeals, only a few will go to the Attorney General. So there's like very little risk for an agency to just say, we don't agree with the supervisor of records. And I actually have a number of these right now where an agency has either just stopped responding after getting an order from the supervisor of records, or they have just straight up literally said, we don't agree, and the only way we'll give you the records is if you take us to court. Um, and some of these have been sitting in the supervisor's lap for literally months and haven't been referred to the Attorney General's office yet. And I can't even get an update on what's going on with them. Um, it's sort of like I mean, it's a real problem because, like, on the one hand, the supervisor, it's like, yeah, it's frustrating. It's like, why can't you just send it to the Attorney General? Hurry up. But on the other hand, there's like a certain uh, calculations involved in this. Like, is the Attorney General going to agree with me? Or, like, what if the Attorney General doesn't agree with me? It kind of like undermines my authority. And, like, you have, like, I understand that there are a lot of considerations that go into this. And that's sort of like what I think one of the big problems is with this system is that the Attorney General being sort of the supervisor of records and the Attorney General having this like sort of split responsibility is a huge problem. Like I think if the supervisor could take people to court herself, she'd be more authoritative. And instead of giving these orders out where she'll say, it's unclear if the exemption, you're citing applies to the records, please provide more information. She'd just say, like, this doesn't make any sense and you need to give these records or I'm going to take you to court. I mean, at least I would hope that would happen. But I think that's sort of one of the big problems.
It sounds like this position is like a hall monitor more than an enforcement or a check.
That's a good way of putting it. I mean, like what typically will happen is like an agency, like I was saying, they'll won't give a specific reason. They'll just give this vague thing where they cite some exemption. And then the supervisor will be like, you didn't show that that exemption applies. And then they'll be like, okay, we'll provide a slightly more specific explanation, but we're still not going to give it to you. And so you'll have to appeal again. And another thing that's really frustrating is the supervisor's office will like, their procedure is sort of like based on the idea that the agency is acting in good faith and that if they are responding to you, then they're fulfilling their obligation. And like they see their job as sort of like mediating that and not like forcing them to respond in a particular way in a sense. So like if an agency writes you a new response while your appeal is pending, they might write a response that they're still not going to give you the records and they might not even address all of the things that you raise in your appeal, but the supervisor is going to say, oh well, they wrote a new response, so I'm going to close my appeal, and if you want to argue about what they said in their new response, you have to file another appeal. And in fact, they don't even have to actually write the new response. Like if the supervisor will call them up, and if they say, oh, we're going to work on a new response, don't worry about it, they just close the appeal. And it's like super frustrating because you essentially like you can like literally explain why they are wrong, and then the supervisor, rather than like taking a side, is going to just like close your appeal and like drag the process out. um and it doesn't always happen that way, but it happens very often, and it's like super frustrating when it happens because it's like I just want you to like give me a decision. And I wish the way that it worked was like the supervisor would just say, like, okay, you wrote a vague response, like give me your best like reasons, and if they're not good enough, then you just have to give up the records and I'm going to make you do it. But like really she can't actually do that. um I mean, there is like one thing that I've learned about the supervisor of records that I don't quite understand, is that the supervisor actually has the ability to call administrative hearings. So she could actually tell the agency, like, I want you to come in for a hearing, this sort of like quasi court hearing, where a hearing officer is going to um, like you'll have two sides that can present evidence and they can like subpoena witnesses and do all the like court stuff, and there's going to be a hearing officer who serves as a judge and ultimately will say what should happen with the records. The supervisor can do this, but it has not done it. This current supervisor has not done it. The last one has not done it. Her two predecessors, I believe, have never called any of these hearings. So that's four supervisors who have never done it. And as far as I know, I have no information about the previous ones, whether they did it or not, but I doubt they ever called these hearings. But I have sort of asked the secretary's office, like, why don't you ever call these hearings? And no answer. Like, I don't know. They won't explain, why they don't do it. And I'm sort of confused because it seems like a way for the supervisor to sort of like assert her authority to say, like, send your lawyers in, like we're going to argue this out, and sort of make them do it in person and have this more like open process. And it would also give the person making the request would have more options then, because like I said, they could subpoena witnesses. And what, like, when you get to ask the agency, like what I found is often when you go through the process of requesting records, they will like not even review the records. Like they'll just make these assertions about them, and then the person like making those assertions has like never even read the records and has like, like, so if you could get people in a room and sort of ask them questions about the records, it would like really kind of, I think, help the process. But this just isn't done. Um and like I don't really know why.
So it sounds like this is just a trash can for complaints. It's like that Office episode where he's like cleaning out the complaint jar, and it's like, can we upgrade to Windows 98 instead of complaint? It just sounds like they're just, well, we did what we were supposed to do. That goes in the trash can now. Like, just can't solve it because they don't have any teeth.
Yeah,
So,
well, I
and
don't
the
want to
teeth that
like,
they do have, they haven't used, and that's weird.
yeah, I mean, I don't want to like totally write off the process, because it actually truly it is helpful. Like, if you file appeals, you will get records that you would not have otherwise gotten. Like they only have so much power. Like you're saying, they're kind of like a hall monitor, but like hall monitors sometimes do get people to follow the rules, right? So like it's not
Yeah,
like,
like, yeah, dude, like you're running through the hall. Like, this is ridiculous. Just give them the emails between the mayor and the chief of police. Like, this is pretty obvious.
yeah, I mean, I think what happens in a lot of cases is like these places, like I was saying, they don't want to dedicate the resources to complying with public records requests. But like when somebody starts to get in their business about it, they are going to eventually do it.
Cudgel.
And it doesn't work every single time, but like it will work, enough that it's reasonable to sort of pursue it. Like, and it's not a, like, I don't want to scare people off from filing appeals, because like I was saying, there are a lot of good things about it. Like the one I mentioned is that it's very simple to do, and it also, the turnaround time is fairly quick. At least for like getting your decision. I mean, you might not get the records right away and you might have to file more appeals, but each appeal that you file has a quick turnaround time. Like you'll get an answer within 10 business days. um, and so I mean, actually, I should mention that when I mentioned how the public records law was updated in 2016, there used to actually not be a time limit for how long it took them to respond to an appeal. and it would literally take them like 2 or 3 months sometimes. Like sometimes it would take them like a month or two, even when all you were saying is like they didn't give me a response. Like I just need you to tell them to respond to me. And it would take them like a month or two just to write up this little form letter. Like they didn't even have to write anything. Like they just basically it's like a form letter that they fill out and send to these people, and it would take them so long. But this law actually has sped up the process, and that's one of the reasons that it's actually fairly useful. And I should also mention that not every state has a system like this. So for all of the flaws that it has, like it's better than nothing, and nothing is what a lot of other states have. So it's still a very positive thing that we have this in Massachusetts.
And I would agree with my very limited public records requests. And recently with your help, Andrew, the only one that's been hard, and we can talk about it in another episode even, but a little bit now, like is the with a police off like a police station and the appeal process. It was the first time that the appeal for me has gone back and forth, and now I haven't heard from them. And I think it really depends on what you're looking for sometimes, but I may be wrong there too. But with other things, I've had a much better much better luck with appeals too, just so the audience knows if they do want to look for the stuff.
And I'm on the side of it can be better. And
Oh, of course.
so I'm
Absolutely.
curious, Andrew, at this I'm gonna kind of put you on the spot real quick. What can anybody listening do other than, they don't need to flood the zone with records requests, but do you have any like politician, like the governor, the former attorney general, now Governor Maura Healey,
Yeah.
promise more transparency? Can we put pressure on her office to clean that up? Is that something that's within her power? Have you thought, like, I'm spitballing here?
Well, actually, that's yes. So there one of the crazy things about the Massachusetts public records law, and this is different from almost every other state in the country, from what I understand, is the governor, the legislature, and the courts are all exempt from the public records law. Like they have total like immunity. Like if you send them a public records request, they can just be like, we don't have to do it. Like, and it's not even like they claim an exemption on like specific types of records, like a state or agency or a town would do. Like they can literally just say this law doesn't apply to us, and we don't have to give you any records at all. And uh, that doesn't mean those parts of the government are like totally opaque. Like court records are largely open. It's just that they're not open through like the public records law. So like it's a different process. And but like as far as the legislature and the governor, this is a huge, huge problem. And speaking of the governor specifically, Maura Healey, when she was campaigning, so Jim Browdy, for people who aren't familiar, he's like a public radio slash public TV guy. He does uh, the TV show Greater Boston and Boston Public Radio. They're both on the GBH, the radio and TV channel. Um, and he was like really on all the candidates about this. To his credit, he's asking all of them, like all the candidates for governor, like do you think that the governor should be subject to the public records law? And he got them all to say yes, I think, and including Maura Healey.
Nice.
And so a few weeks before Maura Healey took office, he had her on like his radio show again, and he was like, like I already asked you about this, but like, are you committed to not claiming that you're exempt from the public records law? And she said yes. But then almost as soon as she took office, she updates her website for the governor's office, and it says that her office is exempt from the public records law. And it cites this court precedent that is from, I think it's from 1997. It's called the Lambert case, from the Supreme Judicial Court, which is our state's version of the Supreme Court. And this case it was about like specific documents related to the nomination of a judge, I think, but it sort of said that the reason these records aren't public is because the governor's office isn't explicitly included in the law. So governors since then have just said, if you send them a records request, they'll be like, well, we don't have to do that. And they might give you the records if they want to. But obviously, it creates this perverse system where the governor can give you stuff that makes, her look good and hide stuff that doesn't. But so she took office and she wrote on her website that, she has this uh, exemption, but she's sort of trying to have it both ways, where she's saying, oh, well, I'm gonna, respond to records requests and she said she'll be the most transparent governor, in our state's history. But then if you look at the policy that's online, it says that she's not only going to take into account like the exemptions to the public records law, she's going to, I have the quote, it's the I think it's the unique any unique obligations of the governor's office. So like, what does that mean? There's no explanation. Like, it's obviously just this big loophole, like this very broad loophole, so that anytime they don't want to release something, they'll just say, well, this is the governor's office and, we have special considerations and we just don't think the public needs that. So, unfortunately, the state of our law allows her to do that. But so for years, there have been bills to change this before the legislature, but they just haven't really gone anywhere. I think part of it is like Charlie Baker didn't support it. And it was like, well, if the governor is like going to veto it, it might be difficult to get it passed. But I think like there's like more of a chance for something to pass like that now, because we had a whole election where all the candidates were saying, yeah, I support this. And Maura Healey, like, I mean, she already looks like a hypocrite because she went back on her word, but she's going to look like more of a hypocrite if they're like, okay, well, you said you're exempt under the current law, but what if we change the law? Like, what are you going to do then? And if she doesn't like support this law, it's going to look pretty bad for her. So I think that one thing people can do obviously is like reach out to your state legislators. And if you check my newsletter on Substack, I recently wrote about this, and there are several bills before the legislature. There's one that would apply the law to the governor's office, but it would only take effect after her current term ends. So it would sort of give her like the first 4 years with no transparency. But then, if she gets reelected, she'll have to be more transparent then. And like that might be some sort of compromise that would get her more likely to support it. There's another one where it would apply the law to the governor's office and the legislature, and it wouldn't be limited to like new records or anything, but it would also create some new exemptions for those records. So there's like a little bit of a people would have to look at the nuance of that one to decide if that's a good idea. And there's like another one where it would apply it to the governor, including everything since Healey first took office. So it wouldn't apply to like older records, like from Charlie Baker, for example, I don't think, but it would still apply to Healey's first term. And this was actually tacked on to a bill that would make some changes for transparency in the legislature. This one wouldn't make the legislature subject to the public records law, but it would make some like changes like the committees would have to post their like votes and testimony online, which we don't have time to sort of get into all of the problems with the legislature, but those are things that people have been talking about for years, like that just like their website sucks and you can't get basic information about like things, and they keep all this like stuff secret about even just like the way committees are voting on bills and stuff. It's like totally ridiculous. So those are things that people should be talking to their legislators about.
I'm spitballing right here. But I'm gonna negotiate here and say I don't mind them saying, okay, like we need to build out a system to make this efficient for the whole state. Like we need to transfer how all we need to come up with a new system. So if it doesn't go into effect, the actual records law doesn't go into full effect until they get that system up and running and spend money there and spend less money elsewhere on cops. Then we should be in the interest for the public good getting more records from the government, whether it's the judicial, legislative, or the executive branch on every level of government. I mean, that's not a bad thing. This is, again, our democracy or our land. And, that's too patriotic for me. But as far as just more transparency is not a bad thing for us who are flipping the bill or being brutalized by the system. Double for those people. Well, final thought on Maura Healey. For me, just this is for everybody working and slaving away who took a pay cut during this inflationary period of the last 4 years that's going on. My wages are. I've taken a pay cut. It's just a fact, based on inflation, and it's harder to get by every month. And I'm lucky, but I know everybody that's listening right now is feeling the crunch. And Maura Healey just. She had the opportunity to turn down a 20% raise, and she took the 20% raise. Bill Galvin didn't, and the lieutenant governor did. So these people took a 20% raise. She said she was going to be more transparent. This is a cop. She was a former attorney general. She is the top cop, was the top cop. She handpicked the next person. We have to hold these people to their word. So call your legislators. Do whatever you feel natural doing, calling legislators or Maura Healey's office, or talk to your neighbors, whatever. Share them this podcast. Please share Andrew's work on his Substack. We will definitely link to that on our show notes and on our Substack for the show notes. So you can't miss that, right, Joanna?
Yeah, I thank you, Andrew, for bringing up the fact that at the higher level, legislature and governor, there's a very little transparency. And so for those, I would just say to people, when you call your legislature, I would urge them to also hop on board to this, being more open about how they vote and sharing transparency, because it's better if the government's transparent. And that's why these records requests are so important and such a positive thing, that I think even though there are problems, like Andrew said, it's kind of a great system. And if it can get better, that would be optimal.
Also, email is probably better because it's an easier way to keep track of a paper trail. So paper trail,
definitely
is, that's, I'm sure, Andrew, you probably have a whole system to organize all your records requests or correspondence, because it's how we can corner and get the truth out by showing the receipts.
And just to sort of pick up on one thought you had said, talking about how we might need to make changes to the law. Basically the legislature is notoriously not transparent, and
Right.
so getting them to pass a law about making the legislature subject to the public records law is going to be a really hard sell. I mean, if you ask someone in power, hey, can you give us more information, and they have all the power to say no, 9 times out of 10 they're going to say no. So I mean, it's just it's going to be a hard sell, and there might have to be compromises along the way. And with the governor's office, not making older records available, that might end up having to be a compromise that people have to make. I think that would be not really great, because I mean, particularly just talking about the last governor, Charlie Baker, he was through that. I mean, that was such an important time in our state's history. I mean, COVID, just the response to COVID. I mean, and there's so much that went on, the Holyoke Soldiers Home with COVID, and, just the mess of the MBTA, and the state police scandal. I mean, you could go on, and just to not have access to that stuff, it's criminal. But if we can get some sort of compromise through and get more access, even if it's only going forward in the future, I think is super important. And
it's important for them to know what we can watch, and that's how we hold each other accountable.
Yeah, and I mean, it's going to be a hard sell, but really it shouldn't, because all you're asking them to do is to follow the same law that cities and towns which often have less resources, are expected to follow. And I understand that like the governor's office and the legislature, they might need to make changes to accommodate a law like that. Like they're going to need more staff who can handle public records requests, and they might have to, I don't know, make changes to the way they keep records just to make it more easily accessible. But like it's something they should be doing, and everybody benefits from it. I mean, like there's not really any other than the cost. There's no downside to it, and we should be willing to accept the cost because of all of the benefits of transparency, just knowing what's going on in government. And really, like, people can be more active in state politics when there's more information. I mean, our government,
Absolutely.
our state government is not just secretive, it's very insular, and it's very resistant to change, and it's not responsive to what people want. And it has very concentrated leadership where the people at the top basically have so much control over even whether we get to vote on bills,
Right.
that just more transparency about how all those processes are playing out would be a great start to just improving the entire process itself.
And that's for the betterment of everybody, literally everybody. This is how, and we can take money from the police, give it to schools, give it to staff, good jobs at the state level, to make sure that transparency is there. And it's just like I don't understand why they can't just be a database. It makes no sense to me. I should, when you make the document, it goes into the database and we can go get it. Like, I don't see what the fucking problem is here. What are you hiding? I mean, yeah, I'm sure, like you said, there's got to be some exceptions, I guess. Like, I feel like I don't really have too many things that I would want off the table personally. But again, we all have to compromise a little bit, but we should shoot for the stars. So I think pressuring these people, campaigning or supporting people that support those policies, do what they can and with what they feel comfortable doing. So if that means supporting politicians that you can support, that will do these things, and or just learning more about the history of the Massachusetts state government.
Yeah, well, let me just say real quick that those 3 bills I mentioned, if people are interested in reading about them or reading the bills themselves, one of the more recent pieces on my Substack is about the one about Maura Healey. It has links to all of those, and it's very easy to find out who your state legislator is. And if you search for Massachusetts, who is my state legislator, there's like a little thing where you put in your address and it'll tell you, and you can get their email and you can send them an email and say, hey, I like this bill, or I don't like this bill, or I'd like changes to be made to this bill before you vote on it. And just let the governor's office know too, that you support increased transparency, and it benefits everybody.
So shout out your social media handles and your any place that our listeners can find you.
Yeah, again, the Substack is andrewqmr.substack.com, and then my Twitter is also andrewqmr.
And I will share your most recent article that you talked about, Andrew, with this episode so people can get to it really quickly.
And thank you so much for sticking around, coming back on. And we were hoping maybe you would want to stick around for the final segment, Ghoulery and Tomfoolery.
Yeah, sure.
This is like kind of our goofy way of lightheartedly doing a rant about something.
And before you jump into it, Spence, I just want to ask Andrew and let everyone know that I would love for him to be coming on again. I know you feel this way as well, but to talk more about records requests, because I know we could talk about this all day.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to talk about more about the appeals process, because I kind of talked about like what's wrong with it right now, but like really there's a lot of sort of like knowledge about it that if you have, you'll get more out of it. And I think that some of it is like sort of difficult to figure out yourself, and it's helpful to hear someone like explain it all. So I'd love to do that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Same here. Thank you. And you're a valuable resource to our community. We appreciate the work you're doing. And that's why we're so happy to have you on to talk about this stuff. And thank you for sticking around for our final segment before we sign off for the day. But so Ghoulery and Tomfoolery, it's our favorite segment here at the Weed Out, where we like to, when we're on the internet and or out in the world, we see some headlines that are so absurd or insidious. Last time we did one of these, we were talking about a bill that a woman, Representative Garcia, and
Organ harvesting bill.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so that was last time, but this
Oof.
week actually more about the dark nature. So this week, New England Public Media had a piece they posted on Twitter with featuring Sheriff Kochi or Kochi. For Joanna, what's how do you pronounce the sheriff's last name?
I'm not sure.
I
I'm
think
so
I
bad.
think I think it's Nick Kochi, but I'm not 100%
I think it's
sure.
Kochi too, but I'm not positive.
Sheriff Nick Kochi, which he's a character, but basically it was a propaganda piece, and we love to point out propaganda, talking about he's working out a deal with Holyoke Community College to create programs for inmates. And the reason I hate this stuff, and this is why it's Ghoulery and Tomfoolery. I'll give my little rant on why I hate it, and then I want to hear what both of you have to think. But why I hate it is because we could just educate people, and give people access to resources, and that would prevent reasons for people to be incarcerated, and also change who gets incarcerated by, most people in jail just can't pay to get off on bail. Like, there's 400,000 people rotting in jail right now just because they can't pay bail. And they're never white. Well, I shouldn't say never. They're never wealthy white men. It's never wealthy white men. Poor everybody, and disproportionately Black and brown people are in jail without a trial yet. So because they can't pay to get out. Anyways, so he is announcing this program, and I hate it because it's propaganda. It whitewashes what the system's doing, and it's to make them look good, and it is good, like great. But like, if we can do this, why don't we just let them out?
Well, you're
It's
bringing this up. It's like the same as this like organ harvesting bill, where sort of the premise of that bill was like, well, it's safe to let these people out of prison, so we'll do it if they give up their kidney. Like, why not just let them out of jail, and then maybe they can decide, for themselves whether they want to give up a kidney once they're out of jail. Like, it doesn't, but
make
like
$1 on a dollar as opposed to 30 cents on the dollar, which they're making on the jail kidney, which is like a fucked up way to say it. It's like, but that's essentially what it was, and that's why that bill was so gruesome. But this propaganda, Nick Kochi, I mean, I don't know. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Andrew. It's just
no, I mean, I think a lot of this stuff comes back to sort of like the same sort of mindset. Like, it's with the police too. Like, the problem with police that people always want to fix is like the bad apples, and it's never like, well, what if we just don't have police do X, Y, and Z? Because if they do, it will inevitably create problems. And like, it's the same thing, yeah, like you're saying with the prisons. It's like, instead of like sending, people in prison like to college and giving them drug treatment while they're in jail, like, just do all that stuff outside of the jail and let them like have lives. Like, why?
Yeah, maybe not segregate them from the population, and obviously there's exceptions to this. Like, we need to deal with people that cannot have proven to not be not violent. Most people in jail aren't violent. Right. And at the end of the day, Nick Kochi, his job as sheriff is to manage the jails in Western Mass, and his primary job is to cage human beings.
And during COVID, he heard from a lot of local activists. So he did not do a great job with mitigating that situation. And
his job is to keep the beds filled.
I know.
End of the day, that's his job. He may say otherwise, but he needs to justify his budget, and his job is to cage human beings. and he has a big war chest. I mean, there's documented articles and podcasts regarding Nikochi that's been reported by the Shoestring. I believe Dusty Christensen was on that one. It's about his campaign financing and his basically stranglehold on Western Mass politics. It's oversized influence. I recommend anybody. We'll link those episodes in show notes as well. Article and podcast episode from the Shoestring, another great journalist. But I don't know, guys. That Ghoulery and tomfoolery was and it's just, for me, I think a lot of people, it goes over their head, and I think that's why it makes me so angry, because it's so innocuous.
Well, because it does seem good, and for those that are like in prison or in jail, to have an option like that is actually better than what you're sitting with all day. But it's used to make the police look better and look good, and that part's horrifying.
Using prisoners as a prop. It's very,
they're already used enough. Like, leave them alone or let them out is where I'm at.
So anyways, I think that's pretty much it. I just want to remind everybody to check us out on the internet. Thank Andrew very much for coming on again. Check all his articles out on his Substack, and we'll share all these links in a nice tidy location. So please do that, theweedout.com. And everybody have a great day, and I'll let the other fellas and ladies here say their goodbyes. So thank you for joining the Weed Out, and take it away, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Andrew, so much, and take care.
Yeah, thanks for having me. You too.